Welcome to episode 200 of the Gaming News Canada show presented by Bede Gaming. I'm still your host, Steve McAllister. Since our executive producer, Mark Silver, suggested in September 2022 that we shift gears from our Thursday afternoon shows on LinkedIn Audio, we've endeavored to be diligent in speaking with the most knowledgeable voices in the gambling industry, here at home, in the United States, and around the rest of the world. Today's guest has been a frequent voice and face on the Gaming News Canada show, and we welcome him back at an incredibly busy time for the industry, highlighted by the efforts in Alberta by the AGLC and the newish Alberta iGaming Corporation to launch an open and competitive sports betting and online gaming market later this year. To talk about that and several other hot button topics of the moment, we say greetings and salutations to the President and CEO of the Canadian Gaming Association, Paul Burns. Paul, it's more than appropriate to have you on this 200th podcast because you've long been a voice of insight, credibility, and calm for the business of Canadian gaming. Also, we're really grateful for your willingness to join us on this show, going back to the days, as you reminded us before we hit the record button, back to our days using Clubhouse back in 2021. When? Yeah. And just, being accessible and sharing your insight and expertise with me over the past 5 years on both this platform and also with the newsletter.
So, and listen, congratulations to you and the Gaming News Canada team for your success. We're grateful that you are here as a voice for industry and give us an outlet because you've added to the discourse, and we appreciate that, and we're grateful the fact you've now done 200, which is hard to believe. Time flies when you're having fun, but it is it's great to hit the milestone, and here's to 200 more.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And listen, fun is a great word. Gaming News Canada has been kind of a rejuvenation of my previous life as a journalist, and I think the biggest benefit is I get to meet a lot of really smart people in this industry. And I often tell people here in my town of Kincardine when I'm playing old guys hockey and also at the conferences that it's pretty cool to be covering in the industry with smart people across a lot of different sectors maybe this isn't always a good thing, but it's I can't imagine. You've been around a lot longer than I have, Paul, but I can't imagine there's ever been a busier time for this industry.
No, there isn't, and it's great, but we are at somewhat of an inflection point for our industry too, from where we are. There are lots of challenges. There are interesting discussions going on with bills in the Canadian Parliament and governments taking their own looks at their gaming business in various jurisdictions. And we think it is an important time, but there has been a significant amount of change. And I think what we can't forget is a lot of that's being driven by the consumer. And that's really what has to be at the forefront of everything we look at, is about the customer. And that's from the products they get to making sure that they have a healthy, positive relationship with gambling. And I think that's what's really, as part of this is really it's being consumer driven, and we need to recognize that when we have those discussions, because it is about the customer, and they're the ones that have decided, because obviously digital platforms, the internet has been a great disruptor. The growth of digital commerce in every industry, the way people choose to consume their gambling products is, everything has changed. I mean, it's like, you come from the media background, the daily newspaper is not what it used to be, and so that's where I think that, it's, and sometimes governments have a tough time keeping pace with the rapid pace of technology, and gaming regulators have challenges, and keeping pace with the evolution and innovation. So it is, but the pace now it's a pretty good clip, and so we are at an inflection point, I think, where there is time for a need to step back and take a look and ensure that everything is meeting the needs of the customer, both from products on the street, but also in the terms of the level of regulation and consumer protection.
Hey, Paul, you and I both mentioned fun, and before we get on to the more serious topics, we're recording this, I think, about 90 minutes after Mitch Marner scored the overtime goal to beat the Czechs in the Olympic hockey quarterfinal game. Mitch Davidson had I thought a really good post in his the Policy Shop newsletter that he was now writing, and talking about the sports system, and there's been a lot of hand wringing over funding around these Olympic Winter Games. And one of Mitch's suggestions is to steer revenue from the sports betting industry to sports bodies across the country. Just your thoughts maybe on that idea, and also because I know you're a longtime hockey coach, you're a sports fan just on the games themselves so far.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a lot happier doing this now than I would have been if it had turned out differently. I will tell you that. But it's the Olympics are always amazing spectacle to watch. The chance to see athletes from around the world, but Canadian athletes in particular, do their best is I'm always amazed, and I still am in awe of what Macklin Celebrini and Connor McDavid can do together on the ice. It's quite remarkable to watch. But yeah, the sport has been challenged. I think you'll remember earlier this year, the Canadian Olympic Committee talked about the federal government allocating money from their GST allotment they get from gaming to funding athletes. They were talking about $140 million shortfall or in need for funding for Canada's national sports organizations, and being able to send folks to the Olympics. And we've had conversations with the Canadian Olympic Committee, and they're understanding their challenges because, we talk to them a lot more about integrity in sport and working with Sport Integrity Canada, but also they've understood that, there's government and lottery corporations have supported local provincial athletes within their jurisdictions through their programs for years. And I always remind people, it's coming. This summer is the 50th anniversary of the Montreal Olympics. And,
right.
and the federal government was then in the lottery business and using the Olympic lottery to fund not only investment athletes, but also an infrastructure in creating Olympics in Montreal in '76. And the '85 agreement was partially spurred by the province of Alberta wanting to be able to have more control over lotteries to help fund their contributions to the '88 Winter Olympics. It was Otto Jelinek, who was then Minister of Sport, that signed that agreement on behalf of the government of Canada. And so there's a long connection in this country on using lottery and gaming to help support athletes and athletic endeavors. And I think some people don't like to talk about that these days, but the fact is that has been true, and it was something that's been widely supported. And there's from 50-50 draws in communities that help fund sport and fun activities. That's great that technology can be used for that. I was at an Oilers game not too long ago and still remark what a 50-50 draw can do on Edmonton on a Tuesday night in terms of its size, and almost $1 million being given away. But, it's there has been this long history, and how can we make it work better? I think is something that the conversation, because as you say, that the government of Canada probably takes in close to $1 billion in gaming revenue through GST in lieu payments and others, and so I didn't see the COC's request for 140 being terribly excessive in that regard. I know governments don't like to say we're going to designate this portion of the sales tax to this and a portion to this, and they don't like to do those things. But the fact is that times like this, it's important to understand that these are important nation building moments too. And you've watched highlights from past Olympics on the broadcasts, and the Golden Goal in Vancouver to other remarkable achievements by Canadians, and that's something I think every Canadian wants to support.
Yeah, and I think it would be a great storyline for the industry, the gaming industry, to point to and say that, yeah, this is a sustainable industry, and by the way, money that's coming through our industry is going to support Canadian athletes. I think that's something I would think that your membership would totally embrace.
No, I think that the fact is that there's that we've seen, there's some of the Scores early sponsorships through Golf Canada were actually to help fund golf development. So there's always a willingness and there's a way, and obviously you work within gaming the regulatory regimes to make sure that you're doing these things properly. But there's definitely, I think, an interest in fact that there's a lot of effort being put in many provinces on their sports infrastructure. Sports tourism is definitely on the rise in terms of focal point for government as part of their tourism strategy, some of their economic development in terms of looking at infrastructure tools. So it is an exciting time to be part of the conversation. There's no question about it.
Hey, I want to get to Alberta, Paul, and as we've been reporting, every week there's no information, but the registration process is underway. We're going to have Dan Keene from the Alberta Gaming Corporation on a future podcast. From a Canadian Gaming Association perspective, what's kind of what are your thoughts on what's going on in the process of Alberta right now? What are the kinds of conversations that you're having with your members about that registration process, and anything else that comes top of mind to you?
Well, so I think that the team at AGLC and Alberta iGaming have done a terrific job in the last few months to move things along to be able to get to this point where they're taking applications. There's been active engagement by both teams to explain the regulatory process and the work being done. And I think that everybody has leaned in exceptionally well to move this along quite quickly in the last few months. And I think, there's still, I think while the regulatory regime has been quite clear, and I think everybody has welcomed what they've seen. Obviously some of the harmonization around standards for advertising, responsible gaming, and technical standards in particular make it easy for suppliers to do business, for operators to enter market, cutting down that friction. Where I think that they've having embraced that, has been a positive for them. I think they've seen that in the number of companies that have inquired and begun the process, which I think is encouraging. There's still issues to be worked on, but it's not that they're not leaning into getting them done. And there's been a very good dialogue between industry and the agencies as we've moved into this. And I think it's as everybody still remarks to me about the sort of a refreshing nature of the Canadian agencies, that there is an openness for dialogue, and where a lot of parts of the world regulators don't speak too often to companies, there's not a level of engagement. And I think that's something that's been a hallmark of part of Ontario's success, but now Alberta embracing the same approach, and the team there have made themselves available. I know they had a very busy week at ICE in engaging industry, players and interested parties to explain, get to know them. And I think that was exceptionally beneficial to their teams. And now it's, there's a draft operating agreement still to come at some point in the coming weeks. But they have listened, they've engaged in terms of how we can improve upon things from Ontario's launch in that marketplace, and listening to the learnings that industry has. And so we're pleased at this point in time. I think we've encouraged them to take one thing is that take your time and get it right, and don't feel rushed, because we want to make sure that there's a smooth entry to market, that the agencies have the capacity to do what they need to do, and so there's there's no, it limits the risk for government, limits the risk for operators, and that we get a strong market opened in a responsible way.
Is your iGaming platform ready for Alberta? Bede Gaming is ready to support your new market entry with a SOC 2 compliant platform, multi-tenant infrastructure model, and unlimited configurability. Future-proof your iGaming performance today with a solid foundation for your next province. Bede Gaming is your partner for success. Get in touch at bedegaming.com. Are there ongoing conversations with the province and also the AGCL and the Alberta iGaming Corporation? I know. I think last time we had you on the podcast, or previously, we talked about it's taken a while for iGaming Ontario to get a centralized self-exclusion program up and running. We've talked about responsible gaming. The CGA now has released its own advertising code. I mean, are those the kinds of conversations that you have? And I guess that's tied to making sure that they get it right.
It is, and that's. And there's in the use of automation and technology from reporting that makes it easier on both sides, agency and operator, in terms of all the receiving data and reporting data, and from AML to financial reporting, all of those things. They've been very attentive and listening to the experiences, and we've we've talked as we get into some of the minutiae of some of these experiences and what's done right. No, we're very pleased at the fact that they're willing to take time to listen and understand and engage. And I think that, it's important for success. The cost of ensuring they're not, is undue cost for operators for reporting for the sake of reporting, that things are done efficiently and effectively. And that's where we've said you've got to take the time at the front end and get some of these things right. And that's where they've, the self-exclusion system they've designed is being built. And the operators will soon be able to begin to test that. They think they've very much heard on needing automation for AML reporting and financial reporting, and they've taken steps to start to put those things in place. So all along, it's pointing in a really good direction for us and what we see in that. But that dialogue has been key, and they've been very open and seeking clarification and getting advice and being able to communicate effectively with industry about what the rules are clearly and how they'll be interpreted and all of those things.
Hey, Paul, I think we've heard that the Alberta market would be, I think, quite a bit smaller than Ontario, but when you look at what's been announced the past, since the news came out that the registrations were going to start rolling along and that the 2026 looked to be a feasible launch date. I mean, all the big players have stepped up. I think the week we record this podcast, DraftKings indicated in their latest earnings report that they've set money aside and they're gearing up for an Alberta launch. We saw quotes from BetMGM CEO Adam Greenblatt the week before that they're excited about Alberta. I think FanDuel has indicated they're going to be there. PointsBet Canada. I mean, all of the major brands in Ontario, it seems, are poised to launch in Alberta. Do you think maybe it's going to be a little bit bigger market than was originally thought?
I think that I've heard somewhere in the mid-20s in terms of the number of companies that have sort of made official inquiries to this point in time. I think that was always, it was part of the conversation early on about, there are 50 companies in Ontario, that if the regulatory regime is similar and the technical standards are similar and there's an understanding that's similar, then you've got a greater opportunity to attract those companies to your marketplace. Is it for everybody? No, I don't think it will be. I think the expectation, I think in some ways they may have been met already in terms of the number of companies. But what people understand is the Alberta gambling market is really quite good in terms of it's been strong and it's had growth. And part of that is it's a population that's still growing as the province. There's some that predict it will have a greater population than British Columbia in the next decade. There has, in spite of challenges with our trade wars with the United States, that they're the least impacted jurisdiction when it came to tariffs. The fact of being able to twin the pipeline to Tidewater has to be able to put more oil into foreign markets. It's had an impact on the economy, and they're, even though the price of oil is not probably where they'd like it to be, in terms of government revenues and other pieces, I think that there is good economic activity in the province, and it's a growing province. And I think from the low tax rates to a much younger demographic, it's proven is still to be a really good gaming market. And I think that's something that has not gone unnoticed by the industry.
Just one more question, Alberta, Paul. I think there's obviously a First Nations presence with land-based casinos in Alberta, and I just wonder what that relationship will look like between those operators, the regulator, and also these online operators that are coming in, and how different is it from what we've seen in Ontario?
Well, one of the conversations we've had more recently is just about the land-based sector, and in fact we've had ongoing conversations, but now it's imperative that some of the changes happen sooner rather than later. And that is that the casino operators in the land-based business can control their data. They can market if they phone an affiliate partnership or they decide to take their brand online. They can use the data to market to customers. That can you put the pieces in place for digital wallets? So if someone has money on an online account and their brand, that casino brand is online, and they go into the building and I want a couple $100 to play blackjack, can I get chips out of my account? Yes, you can. I make some winnings. I want to take it. I want to put it back in my digital account. Can I do that? Yes, you should be able to do that. This is about driving it from the customer's point of view. And that's why we've said that, they have a province-wide rewards program called Winner's Edge. The terms and conditions of that need to change to allow the operators to be able to use this data for other things, that they can control and market to their players, their sites and their offers, that they can put a sign up on their casino floor to say, hey, we're online, or we have a partnership, and if you sign up with this site, you can, because some of bonuses and incentives are only allowed on the sites. Well, from a land-based, the building is their site. It is a place where people should be. And some of these were things that didn't happen in Ontario and should have. In fact, they're still waiting for them. And that's and I've been pretty vocal about the criticism that Ontario left the land-based business behind, and we can't see. And we're trying to tell Alberta, don't do the same thing. There are actually small changes that you can make that can make the world of difference for these operators, and giving them an opportunity to create that omni-channel experience for their customer, who can play with them and come to the casino and play, but also when they're at home, they can still play with them as well. And I think that's critical. That those are part of that the regulations and the rules reflect that, and that's in place now.
The week we recorded this podcast, New Jersey announced a bit of a hike in their land-based casino revenue for January, and it does kind of feel like we're still maybe post-COVID, and that there are those opportunities for land-based casinos. And listen, it's a competitive business, right? But I kind of equate it to what happened with the Blue Jays. Like 2 years ago, the Blue Jays were getting 15,000 people out to a game. All of a sudden, you're winning the American League Championship, and you go in the World Series, and you've got 40,000 bums in the seats every night, and you've got massive TV ratings. And I think and I think you've talked about this before, Paul, like if you have a good product or you have a good show, people are going to spend their money.
Well, it's exactly right. And when it comes to the land-based casino sector in Canada, is one thing we've repeatedly say is that, that in a lot of cases, like Alberta, Ontario, British Columbia, there's private companies working with governments in those environments. The private companies are the ones risking capital. They're investing billions of dollars and hiring thousands of employees. What we need to make sure is, one, there's still an incentive to continue to invest in the business. Two, there's a return on that. and we can't lose sight of that. And it is a very competitive marketplace for people's entertainment dollars. And so you need to make sure that there is ability for these companies to get return on capital investment if they're going to do this, because they'll be good partners for government. But the fact of the matter is, the environment needs to be understanding that there's room for those things to happen, because that will ensure long-term sustainability, and that the product it needs to be invested in and grow. That's why when you see, River Rock has added the Gordon Ramsay steak in the last year. They've added another high-end restaurant. There's really that casinos investing in these properties. What we've seen at the Hard Rock in Ontario, or improvements across the country where people are making regular investments, but they need to know there's a return, and because they'll deliver a fantastic experience, but they need to be able to have the room to do that. And that's the challenge, is that it's not a static market. It's not the same as it was 40 years ago. It's not the same as it was 5 years ago. And I think that's the part, is that we need, and that's the nature of the gaming business. I say the same thing to regulators. Your regulatory regimes need to be adaptable and nimble these days, because someone will come up with another piece of technology to find their way to work on that 2 inches below the regulated marketplace. And that's where governments have to modernize their regulatory regimes and keep on top of it, because it is a dynamic business. And that's where it's highly competitive, and it's being driven by consumer preferences and choice. And they see things and they want them, and they'll go get them. And we got to be able to deliver. We have the flexibility to do those things the right way. And that's really what this is. That's the long-term success of the industry, is that these partnerships between government and the agencies and industry, knowing that there's a dynamic dialogue, because there's lots of parts of our industry are under pressure, and because there's changing demographics from the lottery business. There's the VLT business, is people going to bars as much as they used to be in some parts of the country versus others. It isn't always going to be the same, and that's where you need to rethink and adapt. And that's where you need flexibility. And in some cases, the private sector would be great partners in that.
Yeah, it makes me think about, 10 years ago, if someone had mentioned iLottery and iBingo to you, you might have thought people were crazy. But you realize today that, not everybody wants to go sit at a bingo hall on a Friday night, and the dynamics have changed, and there is need for iLottery and iBingo, and that's why you're seeing companies like Delta or a random state out of Sweden why they're investing here.
Yeah, no, bingo is still a great product, and frankly, if you go in some of the bingo halls in Ontario that have renovated in the last few years, they're great places to hang out on a Friday night, to be honest, for what they've done, and the investment that has been made, and the fact that there was and they've seen a lot of growth in their business because of it. The investment of Class 2 machines in Ontario bingo halls, but I think, and that goes back to governments needing also strategies to deal with these things and understanding the marketplaces and the balances. Because I sometimes challenge, and I often talk to Peter McMahon from the CJO about these things around that. Charitable gaming, I don't see silos anymore. There's lots of products and there's lots of experiences. It's entertainment for people first, and in many ways. And so, breaking down some of those silos and understanding and seeing where you can get a good product offering for the public, but also making sure that the rules and the compensation, the market management, the government role they play is done properly, so everybody has a chance to thrive.
I want to ask you about the Alcohol and Gaming Commission Ontario, which their enforcement arm came out pretty hot and heavy to start the year, caused a bit of a stir through the industry, first with the $350,000 fine handed to FanDuel a couple of weeks ago over some Czech betting activity around Czech table tennis. And then last week, I believe, again, I always get sometimes confused when we're recording these podcasts, but the notice of proposed order to suspend PointsBet Canada's iGaming registration for 5 days, which is something I don't think I've heard of since I started covering the industry. Your thoughts on both actions, Paul?
Well, listen, I mean, I think the regulator wants to clearly send a message to the industry around these. I don't want to dive into particulars in too deeply in any of these, but I think that the nature is that there is also and I think one of the differences maybe between the two incidents, the more recent ones, there there's a lot of self-reporting that goes on in the gaming industry that operators, both land-based and online, will go through their own process where they understand, hey, we didn't do things right, and they go and tell the regulator. And that's an important part, and that's a lot of that's built on trust and respect, and that's important, and that's an important part we don't want to lose. And that operators still feel comfortable being able to do that. And they know they're not going to get severely punished if there's habitual problems that keep reoccurring. Those are other issues, but whether it's a minor gets on a casino floor and you find whether they used fake ID or something, and someone figures out, you know what, that's not right, and the guard goes off and does a little more work and tracks the player down and realizes they're not and asks them to leave. Often cases those are self-reported, and in the same when you see betting patterns and you see other things that are going on in terms of, there's a lot of self-reporting that goes on. That's where you get the integrity monitors and others, that it's that marketplace of being able to find those ways, and that's important to maintain, and that's part of we don't want to lose that, and because it makes the industry stronger and better. And so when things don't go right, and I think that we know that the AGCO asked operators in the case of John Tate Porter about whether they were making market on his props particularly, and had they taken any wagers, and obviously it appears that there was some miscommunication somewhere along the way about what PointsBet had and hadn't done. And I think that in this case, the heightened awareness around betting integrity and integrity marketplace is caught a lot of attention. And I think, obviously, the fine and the proposal that's been outlined is severe. There's no question about that. We'll see whether they choose to appeal or not, because everybody has the right to do that. So I think it's maintaining that healthy balance between industry, making sure that they are things like self-reporting continue to happen, but also that the fact the regulators understand what the expectations are from the companies that they're overseeing. And so it's a balance, and sometimes you get incidents like that, and the fact people often say, well, if rules have been violated and other things, then yes, punishment should be laid out. I mean, I'm not going to want to determine what's severe or not. I don't sit in their shoes, but the point is that also, and that's where I'd like regulators, Canada, to make, if they issue fines on a regular basis, make them all public. You don't have to do press releases; just post them on your website, right, saying we did. If it was a $500 fine and this, or was a warning, or it was something, we all learned from that, and that was the other part. And we've encouraged that too, and said, transparency is good. It's okay. It shows that your rules work, your regime is being followed, and people understand that there's somebody watching. That helps build public trust. It helps bring operator confidence and make sure that they stay diligent. And that's when that's healthy for our industry. We need that.
When the AGCO takes action like that, Paul, is there a role for the CJ to play in this? Like, are you having conversations with the offending operators, or will you have a conversation with someone at the commission?
We don't tend to get too involved in people's business that way. We will, we work to help understand what occurred, and if there's things that we think the larger industry can learn from, we tend to share those sometimes and what that means. And so, and we have regular dialogues with the regulators. And so, we know what their expectations are on these things, but we tend not to get into the finer details, because that's not necessarily our role.
Hey, just one more item out of AGCO, and that was in the latest newsletter. We had the news and our people on the move section that Ben Polito, who had been the interim chief strategy officer at the commission, has gone over to iGaming Ontario to join his former, well, I guess sidekick once again, Joseph Hillier, and I think I go for the first time has a chief responsible gaming officer, and that's Ben Polito. Just thoughts on that hire?
Yeah, no, obviously I know Ben from his time at the AGCO, and look forward to working with him in his new role. I mean, we think we have some ideas that we would like to see happen when it comes to the responsible gaming space in Ontario, with the IGO and possibly with AGCO. But we think there are some things that can be done to create better cooperation in information, because one of the challenges I think we've had, and I think came from the public, was that when Ontario Marketplace opened, there's very little communication about what changed. Why did the government do this? That there was a robust offshore online gaming market that had been around for 20 plus years, active in the province, and the province laid out very clear objectives when they started to review this. I think the clearest of any has been in terms of, it was about greater consumer protection, about preserving consumer choice, and about economic benefits to Ontario. And they laid out those three goals, but you had to go find them in the government documents. They weren't exactly broadcasting them, and understanding what changed, and then the extent of which the regulatory regime in Ontario really set new bars in North America for what they've done, monitoring player play for risk in real time. A very robust KYC process that came about, so minors do not get access. The no mass market of bonusing incentives, opting in to receive bonus incentives is mandatory. The use of tools, all of those things are being very really set a good grounding for the industry start, and that's and a lot of people still say, we don't. Well, there should be rules around advertising. There's lots of rules around advertising. And part of our guidance was really to actually provide the public with examples. Ad Standards Canada, who's worked with us on the code, is the place where people complain about advertising in Canada. They've received lots of gaming complaints over the last 3 years. And a lot of it is, we provided the code really as a tool for the public to better understand the examples of how the regulatory standards work, because they're built off of those. And I think that's something that we want to, that transparency and ability to communicate what the standards are and how they're interpreted and what they mean is very important. Because a lot of the debate I find around gambling advertising right now has been more emotional than factual. We've had gambling advertising for 50 plus years in Canada. It's been part of the discourse. And yes, there's a lot of new advertising. Sports betting was a new product for Canada. What didn't exist. But sports betting also represented about 4% of the revenue in the gaming sector last year. So there's a lot of people conflating IGO's numbers as being sports betting numbers. They're not. And they're broken down into iGaming and their casino and sports. So that's why we've tended to monitor the data points, but also to understand that provinces are the best ones in the position to be able to regulate this. They have the tools and mechanisms, and they have the wherewithal to make the tools within their toolbox, and the governments have the authority to create new regulatory, expand their regulatory regimes, decide what they want to license and don't want to license in their jurisdictions. And that's why we encourage them to go through that exercise.
Hey, that's the perfect segue. I've one thing I've learned over the last 5 years, it's a lot easier to do a podcast and get someone like you to talk for 45 minutes and I just ask the questions. So I'm just curious, what motivated you to write an op-ed on sports betting advertising, and essentially asking Parliament to kind of stand down on trying to ram through a bill around advertising standards.
Well, it's the reality is that the provinces were given and obtained the right to have control over the gaming in 1985. They signed an agreement with the federal government, and over those last 40 years, they have built a high level of expertise and knowledge, and they've managed their markets as they've chosen to within their jurisdiction. That's why not every province is the same, and the fact that probably never will be the same on those things. But that's okay, because that's the provinces have made choices based on their marketplaces. There's been a lot more external forces been pushed on them recently, like the growth in the digital gaming world. That, the internet, as I said earlier, massive disruptor for a lot of industries across the globe, from retail to taxis to hotel. You pick it, it has happened, and ours is no different. And so you need to adapt, and you need to change, and you need to modernize. And that's we've had for a long time. But then what we also say is that then they get to choose, whatever the business relationship or the conduct and manage relationship. That's the provinces can make those decisions, but we encourage them to go through a fulsome discussion and understanding, because, as I said, you can't. Introducing things in silos can be challenging and sometimes not work out the way you want. And that's why you take a holistic look at your gaming business when you do these things. And that's what we've encouraged. And some have done it well and some haven't. And some still need to do it. And so the op-ed was really like, we have been, and one of our core pieces of advocacy at the federal level is that we have been a staunch defender of provincial rights, that the provinces have the best tools. They are making the investments themselves, or making them with partners. It's their revenue that they've learned to and appreciate having within their jurisdiction to spend on their priorities. The federal government gets a little bit of it. And so trying to then introduce a third party that has neither the capacity or the expertise into this space, as I use the analogy about having two, referees on the field, sometimes it just doesn't work. You need someone in charge, and that should be the provinces. And so that's what we said, because, and I want to make that point, because I won't apologize for being a defender of the provincial role in gaming. But I don't think that introducing the federal government at this point, that the provinces, the changes on the criminal code related to gaming have usually come at the request of the provinces. And the provinces have, asked for those, and they, the provinces supported changes for laws for sports betting. They wanted to see that happen, so they wanted to offer the product that they couldn't, but Canadians were getting from offshore. And the need to step up and modernize your regulatory regime and reflect that, yes. But the federal government deciding now that we're going to try and figure this out. There's a lot of what is called for inside of S211 is already being done. Between the Partnership for Responsible Gaming that the lottery corporations support, there's a network of cooperation across the country. There is the Responsible Gambling Council, works in a lot of parts of this country. They recently launched with Griot that they were going to create a national youth gaming strategy. Like all this work, we don't need the federal government to be able to tell them. There's already enough partners and agencies and people in the world that have been talking to each other for decades. And that's what we come down to. And they can manage advertising too. The broadcasting, is a lot of this probably has more to do with the broadcasting industry than it does with the gaming sector. And right. The fact is people seeing national ads. Well, that's the broadcasting system. We also see ads from the United States, which we can't do anything about. Broadcasters are required to take those feeds unaltered. So and the fact that, and part of what I mentioned to is you think that if you ban advertising, there won't be a problem gambling or people won't gamble, is really naive. Like we've known that, that, and the federal government regulates the CRTC, which is television and radio. Well, that's not exactly, the leading avenues for advertising either. But the other side is that, they have abilities within it, but the reality is that when you get conflicting, if you get conflicting regulation, not to say that could impact provincial revenues. Will the federal government compensate the provinces for choices they make? I doubt it. Will they, what is the level of cooperation at the end of the day? If one province or one part of the country feels differently than another part of the country about something that they've decided, this is why having provinces and the regulators they have within their jurisdiction is the best model, because it's decided at a more local level, decided for local tastes and customs, and that's important.
There was a backlash to kind of that tidal wave of advertising that happened back in 2022 when the Ontario market opened. I just wonder, do you think there's some lessons learned as operators come into the Alberta market, and it's a case where I don't want to call it a mistake? And again, to your point about broadcasters, I mean, in 2022, those media companies were very, very happy and grateful to get those advertising dollars from these incoming operators in Ontario. But do you think there maybe is a lesson learned here, and operators will be a little bit more cautious about spending those dollars in Alberta?
Well, I think that there's a lot of lessons probably learned, and I think that every, like what we saw from even television advertising, there was a great bump, and then it started to level off.
Right.
And that's because they established brand and brand awareness, and then you move to other channels to start to activate on that. Yes. I think that's the reality is that and there's local TV markets are not what they used to be
right.
anymore. And that's where, and advertising has gravitated to, yes, it's around sports, because that's where the eyeballs are. That's where people are watching. Is still live sports is one of the drivers of putting people watching television. But, the fact is that a lot of, people don't have cable TV in its traditional sense anymore. Think TV is clearing ads for streaming services, because there's, the streaming is now, most of them offering ads. And so, there's the evolution, even in a few short years. And I think, what and understanding could there be room for innovation? I think so. I think the fact that as a sports fan and a sports bettor, moving things to second and third screens, to saying maybe there's unique broadcasts that are betting focused, but it comes through your subscription service. It comes as a platform, so it's when you're going there, you know what you're going to get. I look to some of the early innovations that hadn't really taken off. That remember PointsBet early on doing a betcast with the PGA at the Waste Management one weekend, and they ran on Peacock, or in the early days of that, or NBC Sports platform, I think as it was known then, a different screen where you could get that with the commentary, with tickers on odds. And it was moved to a place that's where it was. And it was a subscription-based service where you look at the success of things like the Manning Cast with Monday Night Football, and understanding that you could do adding a sports betting component to some of those conversations and watching a game that way. There's more room, I think, from broadcast innovation working with industry that may take a lot of the advertising off of main channel broadcasts, or over the free over the air broadcasts. I don't think that's a horrible thing. I think that's innovation for the product, and for the consumer that wants it, they can go find it. And so I think that there is lots of room still that can change the nature of what people see and how much they see. Sure. I think broadcasters learned a lot from the first few months of the NHL playoffs in May of 2022. And I think we saw a lot of that show up the following year, and we've shown more now, and what the activations in the broadcast are. And we've seen fewer ads on the broadcasts. And partly because they are not inexpensive, let's be honest. And so I think but I still think there's room on both sides for broadcasters too, to work with industry to find innovative approaches to this. And I think, And I think that's, someone may say I'm out of my mind, but I still think that there's room to provide more entertainment options for sports bettors in the sports broadcasting space. And, and I think we'll see. But I also think that, gambling, one of the privileges of being a regulated operator is you do get to advertise. And I think that that's something that the industry doesn't, recognize it's a privilege. And we understand, when there's great effort and detail put into what's in those ads and what can be said and what can't be said. I think we know that there is a strong commitment. This isn't done blindly by anybody, that there's a great deal of work and time and commitment put into ensuring that we have a great relationship with our players.
Two more questions before we let you go, Paul. One is the last 2 weeks in the newsletter we've covered, I guess to parlay en français, a tete-a-tete between the Quebec Online Gaming Coalition and Loto-Québec. The coalition came out with publicized their brief to the Ministry of Finance Quebec a couple of weeks ago on what they'd like to see with the gaming industry in La Belle Province. Loto-Québec responded to that with a lengthy statement that we had in last week's newsletter. Just quickly, your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's always a difference of opinion on these things. There always will be. But I go back to what I talked about earlier in the podcast, is that it's about the customer. And the customers made the options have been available to them. They've chosen them. Most Canadians believe that all online gaming is regulated in some form or fashion because they've had access to it for decades. They've been able to use their bank cards, their credit cards, other payment tools. And so there is that belief. And the fact is that I think that there's the provinces, and I had this conversation with then Attorney General Eby along 2019 and talking about you need to create a regulatory regime and create a regulatory environment. If you choose what you would like to include in your market, that's up to you. But there are a lot of operators who, if there was a regulatory regime created and they weren't invited in, they would leave. In fact, those are the companies that are standing there saying, I'd like to come in and be regulated and pay taxes, to be honest. What you won't get rid of is those that are truly black market operators that never want to be regulated and are never interested in being a good partner with government. They're interested in attacking your market as best they can and taking what they can. And they don't really care about the player. And those companies, then you will spend a lot of time fighting to get rid of. Because if you don't invite anybody in, but there's people that respect the regulatory regime you create. And if you want to set your revenue share tax rate at 75%, no one will sign up. You want to set it at 20%, you'll probably get a lot of people interested. And that's your choice. But the reality is your customers, your citizens, voters are in these spaces and playing because they like it and they like the product they're getting. And they're not doing it under coercion. They're doing it because it's available to them and they like the product that's being offered. And so understanding that, and that's where Ontario came at with one of their pillars, was protecting consumer choice. Because the politicians recognize that, oh yeah, my voters are there playing. And I'm not going to go out and tell them, oh, you can't have that. You can only play on the government site. Most politicians are pretty smart people when it comes to that kind of stuff. And the other side is that it's consumers have driven the change and disruption. Nobody else has. It's the consumers. And so recognizing that, you create a regulatory regime to better protect them. If you want to create economic benefit for your product, you can do that. And then ultimately, once enough jurisdictions do this, what we need to do is change the criminal code. Because the conduct and manage provisions don't cut it. They don't give the provinces enough tools to protect their marketplace. Because this issue wasn't created in 2021 or 2022 with sports betting in Ontario. It's been going on for 25 plus years. in Canada because of the criminal code, that those provisions don't provide protection for provinces or enough tools for provinces to enforce their marketplace. And that's really what the core of this is. And if we can get to do that, and the provinces build the regimes that create a regulatory environment and decide how they want to offer it, then maybe there will be a willingness on the province's parts to come together and say, hey, we need the criminal code to change so we can better protect our markets. Because anything in the middle is not going to, banning advertising isn't going to solve the online gaming problem that of offshore sites accessing marketplaces where they're not wanted. It's only through stronger laws. And ultimately, that's where we're going to be. That's where we have to get to.
Is it hypocritical or talking out of both sides of your mouth by the gaming and lottery corporations to have suppliers who are doing business with them, and at the same time doing business with what they would call illegal operators? I'm asking. I don't have an opinion on it. That's why I'm asking you.
You know what? That's their choices they have to make. I mean, ultimately, they over the years, I think a lot of them started out that way and understood why. But then, M&A activity happens, and all of a sudden, company A you're working with has bought company B, and they spy a whole bunch of other people. It's understanding that the provinces have the tools to improve the regulatory regimes on their own, and that's always, they've always had that, and that's why we've encouraged them to use them. And then within that, you can decide what you'd like to do, and that's why we've never. And a lot of people have accused us of saying a lot of things we actually never said. But we do say that we haven't advocated. We've advocated the Ontario model. Yes, regulation. We have never told a province what tax rate to set as an organization. A lot of our members have a lot of opinions on that, but we've said, no, you got to come to your own conclusions on what you do. But you also have to do it so you respect the land-based businesses, and they get equal footing to compete, and they get opportunities to participate, and that you try and level the playing field for everybody, and that you look at your marketplace in its entirety when you do that. And that's what we've been adamant about. And even more so because what we've seen, the fallout from what happened in Ontario. And the operators got left behind, and there was no even incentive that they couldn't have gone first. We've had the same conversation in Alberta. At very least, there seems to be a more willingness to actually make sure the regulations don't impede them from competing. But this is where government, it's the chance of looking at the whole marketplace when you're starting to make these changes and understand what's best for the future. Because, as we've said, some of these structures and models and laws were created 40 plus years ago, the criminal code in the 60s. It doesn't suit today's environment. And that's a challenge that the provinces have had to deal with as the way they've been looking at their own marketplaces. But, we want expanded regulated marketplace, fully regulated gaming environments from coast to coast for all the products that would be offered are important. And not just regulating one operator or the lottery corporation. Because consumers are the ones that are choosing with this. And if they've chosen these other places, they get access to them. So if you want to, your choice is to take away those opportunities from them. That's, I think, a question you should have with your politicians, and because they're the voters. So, it's part of this. It's a healthy tension. It's great to have dialogue, and to say that, it's a lot of provinces are looking at iGaming a little differently now than they were 3 years ago, and that's encouraging. And I think they've seen what has happened in Ontario. But I think that there's still challenges all over the world when it comes to properly regulating and enforcing markets, and that's and that's where part of it comes from building strong, good regulatory structures. The next is building good laws and creating tools for enforcement.
Hey, last question, I promise. We can't, it's just impossible to ignore the impact of prediction markets and what's going on with the U.S. gaming industry right now. And given the issues that we face here in Canada, I just wonder if the fact that there aren't predictions markets in Canada is a blessing right now for you and anybody else doing business in the country in this industry.
Very much so. I mean, the securities regulators at the provincial level back in 2017 making the decision to not permit binary contracts. I think that is it's excellent for us at this point in time as an industry. Doesn't mean that's going to last for very long until someone finds a way to do something prediction market like that's not a securities product. I mean, we have, Ontario still can offer betting exchanges and things like that, but the exercise is that because one of the things that, we've really seen is that, as a securities product and regulated by securities, one of the things we've seen with the U.S. raid and Venezuela and others is that, securities regulation generally happens after the fact of insider trading, not in real time or not in advance. And, that's where sports betting markets in real time are monitoring their marketplaces and looking for, odd or strange betting patterns. And that there is a network of integrity monitors that are sharing this amongst themselves, and that operators are sharing information cooperatively into a body that gets a more global picture of what's going on in the marketplace through the integrity monitors. That alone, it's let alone the behavior of some of the companies and how they choose to and they're not understanding that this is being treated as a gambling product. So it's an unfortunate set of circumstances the U.S. gaming industry has to deal with at this point in time. I know the states are out to protect their rights, and as provinces should have the same opportunity here if the need arises. But I think that I think we can all take a deep breath that we haven't had that to deal with, and I think that the fact is until we find ways to better regulate it, it probably should be part of the of the gaming environment, and so that's my opinion, and when it comes to Canada, but it's I think that we have to again continue to be diligent, because there's always going to be that next product. There's going to be something else that comes that challenges the regulators, and that's why creating a regulatory regime is not just to pass a set of regs and say, great, we'll see you in 10 years. No, we see in 10 weeks in some cases. So it's and that's the environment we're living in now, and so that's why that's why the dialogue between industry and regulators is exceptionally important.
That is Paul Burns, the president and CEO of the Canadian Gaming Association. And Paul, like the Czechs and Canadians, we went overtime on this one, but it's all good. Just like if you're Canadian, it's all good because Mitch Marner scored in overtime. But always grateful for you to hop on the show. We covered a lot of real estate here, but it just feels like there's some really important conversations to have around the industry right now, and that includes the Canadian Gaming Association's voice.
Well, no, thank you, Steve. I really appreciate the opportunity and the platform you provide the association, and again, congratulations on 200, and hopefully after this there will be 199 more, and we haven't worn out our welcome. But thank you very much for the opportunity as always, and all the best to you and the team.
Great, thank you, Paul. That's it for this episode of the Gaming News Canada show presented by Bede Gaming. You can find this interview on all the podcast apps. You can also see Paul and I on the Gaming News Canada YouTube channel. And to Paul's point, thank you to everybody who's listened to either all of the 200 episodes or at least some of them. And thanks to everybody who's appeared as guests on this podcast. We try to keep the industry informed and educated. So we appreciate Paul and everybody else who's shared their insights and analysis with us over the past 5 years. And we will look forward to seeing everybody again very soon.